On dementia as a global challenge. Before I hand over to Sarah Campbell and we get going with everything, just a few things. If you could keep yourself on mute. If you have any questions, just put them in the chat bar. We'll come to the questions at the end, and Sarah will put those to the panel. If you've not been on Teams before, if you just wiggle your mouse around, you should get a bar across the center. And on that bar, you'll see like a square chat box. If you click that, the chat will appear to the side and you can write then your questions in there. We'll pick those up at the end. Previously, I should have said, so I'm Steve Cousins. I've been with TEDI-London for the past year. I work in the partnership engagement side, and for us, that's predominantly in the moment around industry, but it's organisations more broadly as well. So to kind of kick off today, I'll pass you over to Sarah Campbell. Sarah designed, created, led the successful summer school that we had that was focused on dementia. And I'll pass you over to Sarah now to get things going.
Thanks, Steve. So welcome, everybody. Just as an introduction to today, TEDI-London is a new higher education enterprise wholly focused on engineering. And to highlight the need for the new type of engineer that TEDI-London is proposing to train, we're running the 2021 Agenda campaign, which poses questions around the biggest global challenges we face today and positions future-focused engineers, and therefore TEDI-London, as positive forces for developing solutions to these challenges. So dementia was the chosen subject for our 2020 summer school. And the topic of dementia is not typical for engineering, and therefore it really helps us position the idea that TEDI-London is for a new type of engineer. So it's an absolute pleasure to be here this morning, and for those of you from other places to be here this evening. We have a wonderful panel here today, and I'm sure we're going to have a great conversation over the next hour about why dementia is an important future challenge for engineers. So I'd like to start by inviting our panel members to introduce themselves. So in no particular order, Kavid, could you introduce yourself, please?
Sure. So my name's Kavid Ali. I work for the Mayor of London. I'm on a secondment from the Alzheimer Society. The Mayor of London 2 years ago made a commitment to make London the world's first and best dementia-friendly capital city. And our approach is around taking a multidisciplinary way of working across transport, across design, across education, health and social care, the arts and culture, to try and build our city in terms of policy, in terms of the physical environment, through to education, but more importantly, change attitudes and values in the long term to sustain creating a dementia-friendly city.
Lovely, thanks, Kavid. And now I'd like to ask Chris Lynch to introduce himself.
Hello, everyone. My name is Chris Lynch. I'm the Deputy CEO and the Director of Policy, Publications and Communications with Alzheimer's Disease International. For those of you that aren't familiar with us, we are the global body representing Alzheimer and dementia associations globally. We've got 102 members, including our founding members, which dovetails nicely with 3 of the partners, I think, in the TEDI course. So the US Association, the UK Society, and Dementia Australia. Delighted to be joining today.
Thanks, Chris. And now, Kishan, if you'd like to introduce yourself.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Kishan Karapanon, and the past 5 years I've spent as a lecturer and research fellow at the University of Wollongong. I've had the pleasure of working on one of Judy's successes, which is the Desert Rose project, and other colleagues at the university. I participate in lots of startup activities and hackathons, and I have a goal, and ultimately it is to bring to market an interesting, viable solution for the aging population. I'm currently working on a book with fellow authors on healthy aging in Asia.
Thanks, Kishan. And now, Dennis, please could you introduce yourself?
Yeah. As we used to say in the old days, good greeting time. My name's Dennis. I got a diverse background. One thing I found amusing is that 45 years ago, as a science undergraduate, we used to call engineers scientists with their brains kicked out. Currently, I'm working with some of the projects at the University of Wollongong. I met Kishan as part of the Desert Rose. We're still going to have a cup of coffee. But my claim to fame is being diagnosed with dementia about 8 years ago. I'm part of Dementia Australia's Advocacy Advisory Committee, among a few hundred other things that I'm involved in at the moment. It's always hard to think of everything at this stage, because this is my, I think, 5th meeting today.
Oh, wow. Well, thanks, Dennis. That's a great introduction. And Lynn, if you'd like to introduce yourself, please.
Hi, everybody, and thanks for having us here on the panel and for the opportunity to have taken part in this summer school, which has been really interesting. I'm another academic from the University of Wollongong. I'm a principal research fellow there. I'm actually a dementia fellow through the National Health and Medical Research Council funded fellowship. And my main area of interest actually is around the creation of aged and dementia friendly communities. I lead a team of interdisciplinary people called Connections for Life with Dementia, many of them who you have met as part of this summer school, where we're trying to look at how we promote connections for people living with dementia, social connections, intergenerational connections, how we design good environments to support and enable a good life for people with dementia. And I've also had the privilege of being a WHO IFA age-friendly mentor and been able to work with people in quite different environments as they've tried to think about how to make their own cities and communities more age-friendly as well. So thanks for having me here tonight, and I'm looking forward to being part of this panel.
Thanks, Lynn. And Sofia.
Hello, my name is Sofia Colaco. I'm a mechanical engineering student at Nova School of Science and Technology in Portugal, and I'm one of the students at this year's TEDI-London Summer School.
Thanks, Sophia. And Nicole.
Hi, my name's Nicole Pereira, and I study international management at King's College London, and I too am one of the students on the TEDI-London Summer School programme.
Thanks, Nicole. And Zemzem, if you'd like to introduce yourself.
Hello, my name's Zemzem, and I study chemistry at the University of Southampton, and I'm also a student at the TEDI-London Summer School.
Lovely. So thank you, everyone. The structure of today is that we will be asking the panel some questions and hearing their views and having what I hope will be a very stimulating discussion about dementia as a global challenge and being part of TEDI-London's 2021 agenda. As Steve mentioned, if you do have any questions, please post them in the chat. And then after our panelists have addressed the questions, we'll be opening the floor up to questions from the audience. So to begin, TEDI-London's 2021 agenda campaign focuses on the big global challenges for future engineers. I'd like to ask the panel, why should dementia be on the 2021 agenda? And so if I could invite Lynn, Kavid and Chris to address this question, starting with Lynn.
Thanks very much, Sarah. I really think choosing dementia as being on the 2021 agenda is really critical for any program that is thinking about future-focused engineering and the way that engineering has the power and the capacity to contribute to a more just and a more fair and equal world. We all know, having taken part in this summer school and from other news and studies we may have done, maybe because of the jobs we do as well, that population ageing is a reality now. And we know that associated with that, we have an increasing number of people living with dementia. We're also living in a world that is rapidly urbanising, and the sizes of our cities and communities and the nature of the way the social ecology of these places is changing. So the places that we live, the places that we work, the places that contribute to our quality of life and our sense of belonging are in a constant state of flux and change. And we really do need to act now to increase the focus on planning and building communities that are supportive and enabling for people who are ageing, including those who are ageing with cognitive impairments. We know that because of environmental press, that environments that are deficient, environments that are inaccessible, have a much greater impact on the quality of life of people who are living with all kinds of disabilities. And so as part of Agenda 2021, I really hope that your future-focused engineerings are beginning to reframe addressing dementia as actually an issue of human rights. We need to raise awareness that good design is something that is essential to people's rights to freedom of movement, to participation in decision-making, and to being enabled to take part and have active choices about things in their own life. So I really think that the connection between design and engineering, and the fact that it is our future-focused engineers who will be designing all kinds of things, our services, our infrastructure, our physical environments, our products for the future, that if your engineers have learnt and begun to associate dementia as a rights issue, as a social justice issue, then you know, that will justify its inclusion, I think, on Agenda 2021 as an absolutely critical issue.
Thanks, Lynn. And I think it's such a good point, and it's certainly something I'm a big advocate of, that actually this is a human rights issue. And Kavid, is there anything you'd like to expand on, or a different perspective perhaps on why dementia should be a Agenda 2021 global challenge?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I really agree with everything Lynn's saying. I think there is so much in potential within engineering-led solutions that can promote equality. I mean, perhaps quite topically at the moment with everything that's going on globally around Black Lives Matter. I mean, in my job, one of the most kind of concerning statistics is looking at a projected 7-fold increase with prevalence of dementia in the UK for people from Black and minority ethnic backgrounds. And whereas, you know, we do live in a society where bias and prejudice exists, I think through design, through really well thought out design, we can begin to grapple in a different way with some of the inequalities that exist within our systems, within our health and social care system. And I think that's something that engineers can begin to really have a stake in when tackling design for dementia. I mean, also the really, I think, exciting thing about considering design for dementia and this being on the agenda is the fact that dementia is so cross-cutting as a condition. You know, 80% of people who have dementia will have another condition. So when you're long-term condition, so when engineers are thinking about designing for dementia, they're not just thinking about designing for dementia. And I think more than anything, it's about developing an approach to engineering and design that I think is going to pay dividends in so many different areas. I mean, you know, simple things around you know, lighting, around flooring, around the effects that this can have on people. It doesn't just benefit people with dementia. You know, it tends to benefit people with mobility issues, tends to benefit people with other forms of cognitive impairment. And I think that's really, you know, really powerful. And I guess just in terms of its importance on the agenda, I think it comes down to really something quite fundamental, and it's engineers looking at public health and looking at the health of and well-being of a population. Because I think kind of, you know, when we sort of cut through why we do everything, you know, we do it so people can live longer and hopefully live well. And when we, you know, when we consider designing for dementia, I think really it comes down to that fundamental fact of wanting people and building environments in which people can live well. So yeah, thanks.
Thanks, Kavid. Yeah, and I remember the very first time I met you, you know, I said to you, I'm a massive advocate of designing for dementia. You're sort of designing for many other groups as well, and that's why it's such a great group to focus on, in my opinion. And Chris, anything you'd like to add?
Yeah, thank you. I think what Kaved and Lynn have both said, they started off with a rights-based approach, and I think that's fundamental in terms of dementia and design going forward. Two incredibly coincidental things, I think, are important things to link in here. I think from the current pandemic scenario, from the COVID scenario, design has a very important role to play going forward. Age is the biggest risk factor for dementia. Age is also the biggest risk factor for COVID. So the constituency there is evident. And also, I was so pleased, Sarah, when you and Steve approached us, because this year's World Alzheimer Report is also on dementia design. So that's going to launch on World Alzheimer's Day on the 21st of September, and hopefully bring a lot of the things that we've been discussing and that you guys over this summer school have been talking about and mulling over to life in a set of recommendations and principles that can actually translate. But can I just take it back one step and say, I mean, in terms of a challenge, an agenda for 2021, the positioning of dementia at the moment as a global challenge is absolutely evident. As a reminder, there are approximately 50 million people living with dementia at the moment. That figure's set to more than triple by 2050. Not unsurprisingly, when you look at figures for the aging population, by that period, there'll be over 2 billion people over the age of 65. So you can see the huge demographic switch there. In terms of cost, it's already $1 trillion a year cost, 40% of that, which is informal costs, the cost to the individuals. We try and translate that into marketing speak sometimes, and that's a case of dementia developing every 3 seconds, and it really does give it some kind of global poignancy. I think for the design and engineering solutions, it has to be completely dovetailed with our health and care system's lack of preparedness at the moment. I think underpinning absolutely everything, following a diagnosis, both for the person with dementia and for society as a whole, the global response has to be to enable people to live at home and in their communities for as long as possible. And as Kaveh said, to live well. And I think design and engineering can actually facilitate that. So incredibly good timing and really poignant timing, I think, for this agenda.
Thanks, Chris. Yeah, and it's really interesting to hear the kind of context of actually COVID, aging populations and the costs associated with that. Thank you. So my next question is, what can engineering do for challenges related to health and well-being? And I'd like to invite Kishan, Dennis and Sofia as our engineering student to talk about this. So Kishan, what can engineering do for challenges related to health and well-being?
I think historically, engineers have always done a lot of questioning in the health and well-being space. I think before doctors were doctors, they were engineers. Mm-hmm. And somewhere along the line, one decided to work on engineering the environment, whilst the other said, no, I'm quite happy with the human body. I'm going to engineer the human body. And I think I'm a big picture person, and I find the overuse of pharmacotherapy, for example, was one of the reasons why I wasn't comfortable in being in medicine. And my eyes shifted towards the environment and society. And I noticed over the last 10 years how technology and engineering solutions were able to move society in a direction, ask difficult questions, get people to think, measure their behaviors, and this is this is not just civil or mechanical engineering, but it's a myriad facets of engineering that are now shaping our society. And I think that if we take a big picture view of what health and well-being is, it is essentially a re-engineering of who we are as individuals and as society. And the technology allows us that. And even if I just mention one aspect, the ability to connect. We are sitting here from different parts of the world talking about a global topic with Dennis and for example, and we're able to bring ideas together for the purpose of improving health and well-being of people. So engineering, I find the field of engineering quite used to asking tough questions, and they're okay in messing things up and breaking a mold and trying again. Whereas in the medical field, there's some sort of a push to always be perfect and get it right. And it's Atul Gawande in his books, the former Surgeon General in the US, said that, doctors give the impression that they're working with a perfect science. The beauty with engineers is that they never give us that impression. And you can tell them that, it sucks, so let's do this again. So this is why I love working with engineers and engineering sciences in health and well-being.
Thank you. It's really interesting to hear your kind of experiences in the medical profession, and I certainly am a big believer that actually it's not just about the biological. I'm a psychologist by background. It's not just the biological, it's also the social and the environmental. So Dennis, as an ex-engineer, what do you think engineering can do for challenges related to health and well-being?
I think the secret is having an open mind and asking not just the right questions, but the right people, which may not have been happening much in the past because of the people's understanding of what dementia was or lack of understanding. And I put a note down here to myself to say something along the lines, it doesn't matter what you're designing, whether it's theoretically a better mousetrap or a Martian colony, you've got to consider the impact that people with dementia using that may have, because the chances are people with dementia will be having to use that in the future, if not now. And I often suggest to people out of their own self-interest they should be making things better for people with dementia, because in 5 years' time or 10, 20 years' time, it may be you who's having to make advantage of what you've done in the past. And I think another philosophical change that's occurring, to use one of Richard Fleming's favourite words, is taking a salutogenic approach. And I must admit, discussion about the medical world, the one thing I think that has never been designed for people are hospitals. They're based on prison design from the 18th century, and that philosophy flows through the medical system. So I think the worlds are totally open for anyone who wants to do some better design. Yeah.
Thanks, Dennis. And as you said about actually the user in the case of our student projects, the person with dementia should be at the forefront of that design process. That's something we really hope our students have taken on board from our summer school. So Sofia, as an engineer who's been part of the summer school, what are your views on what engineering can do for health and wellbeing challenges, or dementia in particular?
Well, this is actually a question that I asked you, Sarah, in the beginning of the summer school. I don't know if you remembered. But I think engineers are mostly problem solvers. And so they look at society, or they should look at society and see what's missing, what isn't working right, and trying to work towards solving that. But related to health, all engineering discoveries and products have actually been based on life. If we look at Da Vinci, he used to watch birds in hopes of making a flying machine. So I think we have forgotten that aspect, that we should look within our planet and see what's already there, and trying to make that into something that will help our society evolve, So engineering should be hand in hand with anything in our evolution to better ourselves and to help one another.
Thank you. And how have you found that philosophy? How have you embedded that in your experience at the summer school?
Well, I think one of the things that pops into my head straight away was Katina's sessions. They were very, how do I say? they really like they made you look within and see and analyze society, and not just by looking, but what images, what things made you feel, and how what would you do to change that feeling into something better. So her sessions were something that really really stayed with me in that aspect of changing how I viewed myself as an engineer, not just machines, not just having a narrow like way of thought, of thinking, and actually seeing engineering as a very social and very personal science in a way, if that makes sense.
Yeah, lovely. Thank you. And so my next question to the panel is, how important is design when developing engineered solutions? And I'd like to invite Kavid and Kishan to speak more on this, because you've both talked about this earlier. So Kavid, how important is design for developing engineered solutions, particularly in relation to dementia?
Fundamental, in a word. The way I sort of look at it, design, you know, it's where the idea interacts with behavior and the usability of it, and I think with designing for dementia, I mean, designing for anything, but designing for dementia, I think what we really want, whether it's a shared space in a park, whether it's you know, assistive aids in a kitchen, is we want to fundamentally influence behavior of people, and I think it's the design aspect that allows us to do that. You know, for people with dementia, usability is crucial. You know, I can cite the amount of times we sort of sat at meetings and people have pitched ideas to us, but the fundamental truth is, because of the lack of thought in design, as much as the idea itself, the kind of fundamental core idea is really strong, it's just not accessible. And I think, you know, through really through going through a strong design process, often a co-design process, especially with people with dementia, really meaningfully working with the people who this thing is for, you know, taking an approach that we're not kind of doing something to people or doing something necessarily just for people, but we're doing things with people. I think we can really achieve a lot, and I say fundamentally begin to influence behavior in such a way that it becomes part of our society or part of our routine, and a part of where we kind of build society and communities, you know, through to building individual homes and products and services.
Thank you. Yeah, and it's that idea that people we're designing for in mind, I guess, is that actually they're the experts of their experience. So it's designing with rather than designing for. And Kishan, anything you'd like to add, given your kind of experience with startups and design and very interdisciplinary in your approach?
You know, I'm glad to say that Kavid really covered the essentials when he answered this question. I'm going to try and complement what he said. The word design has become like a word detox in wellness. You know, it's often used willy-nilly. It's often used everywhere, and my co-author, Professor Jerry Boddicker, used to say, always ask me, Kishan, what is the tox and how and what are we doing? Or and so design, when I look at it, and I'm fascinated with words, because that's how us, you know, human beings became who we are, through inventing words. What is the sign and what are we doing? Now, I don't have the answer to this question, but I can give you maybe 3 things that has come across my table so far. I'm allergic to power imbalance. So and a good sign of that is a good being of the sign of the old world order is the inclusivity. And the technology has to enable that. So that's power. That's one thing. I dislike power so much that whatever I do has to has to enable, not even the word empowerment, because that's still quite condescending. Who am I to empower someone? I need to relinquish power. and I will relinquish power through the use of technology, through the use of my own life practices and how I treat people. So power is really important in design. And then let's go to what Sofia said earlier about evoking emotions. And emotion is evoked through the creation of meaning, and that's something that technology can do at scale. It would have taken years if I had written this down for you to finally maybe even come across what I'm saying. You know, it would have, if I took snail mail, it would have taken 3 or 4 months, but now you can hear it verbatim straight from my mouth, and you can see me do it with all my gesticulations. And finally, it's reflexivity. I just cannot stress how important reflexivity is, because a good designer changes. A good designer reflects critically by asking, oh, what am I not doing right? Why is this not? It's never good enough for a designer. It's never a finished product. But reflexivity means you change your practice as you interact. I changed my practice as I interacted with Dennis over a year. I changed my way of thinking as I interacted with Lynn Phillipson over a year during the Desert Rose project. I looked at my own home and I went, that's going, this is going. And only a few months before I said, oh, we need a media room. And now I said, we have too many rooms. What's the heat map here? Is this wheelchair friendly? Are my in-laws going to have, you know, an easy access to the house? You start changing and you start thinking, no, we should be downsizing. This is unnecessary. Is this sustainable? So reflexivity, power, and meaning are the 3 things that we should be designing, as in it's already been built for us, but we need to unmesh this whole thing, and that's where design comes, and that's why design is important. It's a revolt against what used to be, what seems to be normal. That's it.
Thank you. That's really interesting. And I know that later on today, I'm going to be thinking very carefully about what you said, particularly about around the words and the language. And yeah, power, I think, so important, and really great you highlighted that. And as an emotion researcher, emotions and meaning are very important to me, and reflexivity as well, because I think that actually helps us get clear around power, emotions and meaning. And we've very much embedded reflexivity into the summer school. And we were talking yesterday about how a few of the student groups, you know, their ideas have radically changed in each of their week submissions, and we were so impressed how they pulled that together for the pitch panel. So thinking about our student experiences, Nicole, would you like to talk about, as a non-engineer involved in the summer school, what you've learned, or what you think now as a result of the summer school is important in terms of design and developing engineered solutions?
Yes, definitely. Yeah, I think that the summer school was amazing in kind of removing not only misconceptions, but also changing the way you perceive the world, and also the people that you work with. So a lot of my team were engineers and architects, and they have a completely different way of thinking from me, who comes from a business background. And actually, you tend to think that business is this broad subject that has this really open mind, but actually I found that a lot of the practices that we ourselves input are also quite rigid and narrow. And so it's interacting with people in such a multidisciplinary setting, and really, as Sofia said, using that sense of the reflection in yourself and in the people that you're working with. And it really does change your perception on how you deal with the world, because a lot of us, so in terms of marketing, it would be, okay, let's do a bit of market research, right? The people need this, I'll give it to them. But it's not really that open dialogue that we started to develop when we were co-designing. And so that new way of looking at the world, that, as you said, people are experts in their own lived experience. And that was definitely a new concept to me. It's a concept that's known, but it's not really implemented. And I think that was so important for the summer school. So anyone who's necessarily not part of a design background, I think that was such an important takeaway or learning from that there's so many different ways of thinking. No one way is right, but if you combine people and their ways of thinking, you will come up with something amazing, because people constantly question and push you. So that was my main takeaway.
Oh, fantastic. Because that's very much the TEDI-London approach. So that's really fantastic. That's been your experience, and that's what we managed to create in the summer school. So my next question, thank you. So my next question is, the TEDI-London Summer School focused on dementia-friendly environments. And so I'd really like the panel to reflect on why environments are so important for people with dementia. And I'd really like Lynn, Chris and Dennis to talk on this question. So Lynn, if you'd like to start.
Thanks. So I guess I mentioned before this idea of, environmental press. So we know if we have poorly designed environments, or if environments haven't been well thought through, that people who are living with particular kinds of disabilities may have more difficulty adapting, or even just being unfamiliar with environments. If they're not well designed, they can make functioning for all of us quite difficult. And I think regardless of what abilities or disabilities we may be living with, we've all experienced the challenges of poorly designed or confusing environments. But I want to come back to that idea of environments and their capacity to enable rights. So really, for too long, people with dementia and all types of disabilities have been excluded from the environments in which we as human beings express our agency and belonging to society. So even things like the freedom to move about, people with dementia being routinely restricted, segregated and locked up and indefinitely detained in what we call aged care from the point of view of the grounds of safety, I think is one of those things that we really need to question. I think this use of the environment to either enable or to restrict and segregate and reinforce the pathological view of dementia really needs to be explored more. So I think environments are critically important, and they can either reinforce power, as Kishan said, or in the absence of participation, actually even exaggerate a lot of the challenges that people living with dementia face. So that's one of the reasons I think environments are incredibly important.
Thank you. And I love that idea of environments that should enable rights. And I've learned so much from your sessions at the summer school around this kind of idea. So thank you for your contributions. And Chris, anything you'd like to add about why environments are so important for people with dementia?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm so happy that Lynn is reinforcing this message around rights. I mentioned the World Alzheimer Report coming out later this year on design. And one of the main focus or priorities for that is to really establish the Convention of Rights of Persons with Disabilities. I think if we move back 20 or 30 years and we see the movement for visible or physical disabilities and the adaptations through design to environments that came with that, from support to within rooms to ramps outside buildings, etc. That really does need to translate now into support that and changes and modifications through design for effectively often the invisible disabilities that are associated with dementia, alongside some of the physical ones as well. And I think design through dementia-friendly initiatives, through dementia-friendly communities, it needs to permeate all areas, public spaces, as well as community domestic environments, hospitals, absolutely care environments, and we've seen that exceptionally poignantly during COVID. Where care environments through design perhaps could have mitigated some of the issues, and perhaps have also exacerbated some of the issues as well. But we see it everywhere through our evolution, and I think it's what Kishan was talking about, is this need to constantly evolve through design as well. And if you picture what our modern day airports look like compared to airports 10, 15, 20 years ago, and the exceptional level of challenges as an environment that now adds to somebody with dementia trying to traverse that space or that environment, and it happens everywhere. I think our march to better design, better use of technology, etc., absolutely needs to be hand in hand with people living with dementia and the carers for that first-hand experience. So it absolutely doesn't get neglected. And I think In terms of a philosophy behind dementia-friendly communities or initiatives or environments, we're big fans of the approach of 1,000 flowers bloom, that they really shouldn't be overly frameworked and overly restricted. We see some incredible stuff coming out of organic development, organic growth, that are really surprising, and certainly in terms of design. And if I can just touch on one thing, which is very design specific, I did a really, really stimulating interview a couple of weeks ago with the guys at Skanska in Sweden. And they have set up a Bocklock, an organization between Skanska as a construction company and IKEA, developing dementia-specific housing in Stockholm. The amount of adaptations they have made is incredible and continues to grow. They're continuing to learn from it. But what they've added into it, which I think is a really interesting concept, is the aesthetic approach of design as well. And I don't think that should be forgotten in this conversation, particularly if we are adamant that we want, as a globe, to facilitate people living at home and in their community for as long as possible. So I think aesthetics as part of design really has to take a strong role as well.
Thank you. Yes, and sort of pulling together what many of you talked about that living well and enabling, and that the design is not just about functionality, but also aesthetics, also about the person designing with in mind. And I really liked you both talking more about the importance of environments, and it made me think actually how many types of environments there are, and all of them need to be thought about. And it's not just the at-home, it's not just the residential care facilities, it's also airports, public spaces, and sort of everywhere. And it makes me think what a challenge that is, and how far we still have to go actually. And Dennis, I've heard you talk with the students across the summer school about your experience of environments and how they have helped or hindered you. Would you like to talk some more about your experience with environments and why environments are important for people with dementia?
Well, just from experience, you know when you're walking through the community and you're not conscious of having to do anything particular, that it's reasonably friendly. But when you start having to second guess changes in pavement and things like that, it really becomes a challenge. And I was just thinking that out of all the environments I've experienced, the ones that have been the best probably haven't been designed to be dementia friendly. It's been serendipity that they are. But likewise, a lot have been designed, couldn't be designed to be more dementia challenging, if that was their objective. And one of the most challenging environments I've been in was a disability conference where they had done a tremendous amount to make it wheelchair accessible and vision impaired accessible. But if you weren't vision impaired or you weren't in a wheelchair, it was difficult to move around.
That's really interesting.
Because the assumption was that really there's two disabilities in the world. If you're in a wheelchair or you're blind, that covers the full gamut of disability. And that's really distressing in an environment like that. And I think the real secret is when the environment is meeting those requirements of being enabling, it enables you to continue to live what you would consider to be a normal life, to be able to contribute and be a member of society. But when you encounter those little hidden obstacles, which everyone encounters, but no one really sees as an obstacle, that's when you start to, I suppose, lose your basic human rights are being eroded at that point. And I think that's often I won't say it's probably more than often. I don't think it's very rarely would be intentional that the bad design is going to reduce your basic rights. It's an unforeseen, unplanned, unthinking consequence. And probably what the world needs now is more people that are actually thinking I like to tell people that a brain's a wonderful thing. It's a shame people don't use them.
Thanks, Dennis. And I think that's a really good point you make, that actually you don't notice when the design of an environment is enabling, because it's more that it doesn't impede you, so you don't notice it. It's only when it does hinder you in some way you notice it. And I think you raise a really good point about inclusive design needs to be truly inclusive for everyone, rather than inclusive for a specific group and then unintentionally excluding other groups. And Zemzem, I'd really like to hear your views on what you've learned from the summer school about environments being important for people with dementia.
Yeah, so I think through talking with people, maybe not directly with dementia, but people from different backgrounds who also are of the elderly generation, who are more prominent in dementia, that there are a lot of physical barriers that really a lot of people don't realize and recognize and see in different environments. And I think a lot of designs are based maybe targeting one sort of specific disability, and maybe even excluding, making them feel excluded by designing just for that disability. And so when we were working through the summer school, we really thought about how to be inclusive to everyone. And I think designing for dementia and looking at environments that would be accessible to people with dementia was looking at environments that would be accessible to all. And I think a lot of going through the summer school was realizing that a lot of things that maybe seem quite simple really were quite difficult for certain people. And I think listening to some testimonials from people with dementia and how difficult it is for them, I could really empathize, because I think if you have any sort of, so I have epilepsy, and it really connected me to them, being able to recognize and feel their struggles through my own personal struggles. And I think especially doing this virtually and having a virtual summer school rather than being in person, it really highlighted the idea of being connected, and how not having environments that allow people with dementia to go about their day in the way they want is really disconnecting people from society, from connecting with individuals that maybe might not seem like really vital, but really are vital as part of your support network as you go about your life. So I really learned a lot of things about connecting and how environments are so important for that connection between people.
Thanks, Zemzem, and thank you for your honesty and openness just then. And I really love that idea of connection has come up across the last sort of hour on this panel as well. And I think it's something really important to hold in mind. And actually, how do we foster that connection? How do the environments facilitate connection? And you raise a really good point about, some of the things we've learned through the summer school of how do we facilitate connection when everyone is remote and virtual. And just sort of continuing on that idea of the summer school and what you've learned, I'd really like to ask you, Zem, again, and Sofia and Nicole to just say a few more, expand on what you've already said about TEDI-London is all about learning new things through doing. So what did you learn by taking part in the summer school? So Zem, if you want to go again, please feel free.
Yes, so I learned so much through my team members. I was part of an incredible group of people. And I think I learned so many different tools and ways of communicating. And I think, like Kishan said about relinquishing power, that's what our group did. We really trusted each other, and we didn't have a team leader, and it just worked so well. We trusted each other's judgments, and we weren't constantly asking like, oh, can I do this? It was more, I'll take charge and do this bit and then check later. And it was really really, really inspiring in a way to be part of such a wonderful process. Yeah, I learned so much through that.
Amazing, thank you. And Nicole, what have you learnt by doing?
I would completely echo what Zemzem said, in the sense that I learned so much. Like that would be the first thing if someone asked me, what did you learn during the summer? So much. I think there's a whole section on interpersonal relationships and how to manage not only understanding people from a different discipline and the way they think might be slightly different to yours. And it's coping with that, and it's bringing that to the forefront of how you interact with them. And then also, I think it also informs the process that you then go and use. And then obviously it's the whole learning about dementia, which I actually was completely ignorant about at the beginning, because it was a case of, yes, you know it exists, but you don't really know how it affects people, or how you can, use your own input with others as students to actually make active change. And I think that's one key learning, is that you're never too small. Your work is never insignificant. There is always something that you can do with the skill sets that you have, or with things that you can learn to help change someone's life. And so I think that really inspiring students, they say students are the future of tomorrow. And I think that really resonated with me, because it was the fact that you could come from anywhere, any background, any discipline, and you could really affect change. And I think that's, the key of this summer school for me.
I love that. Thank you. And it's exactly what we're trying to promote at TEDI. So I'm so pleased you've had that experience. And Sofia, anything you'd like to share about what you've learned by taking part?
Yeah, I definitely agree with everything Zemzem and Nicole said, especially because Nicole and I are on the same group, so we definitely know what she means. I would add by saying that TEDI-London Summer School gained a lot by going online, because without that, there would never have been so many students from all the different continents, and adding to the diversity of it. I believe it's not really about what our background is in terms of like what we studied. It doesn't matter if we're an engineer, or if we do business, or if we're an architect or a dentist. Those skills that we have learned become part of us, but they don't dictate what we're going to do in life. We just have to use them to how we see fit, because we'll most likely be adding something of value to any project by the way our past has been built with the skills that we learned from our degree. So myself as an engineer, like I don't think that will necessarily mean that I'll be working in a factory or designing something for the rest of my life. I believe that society nowadays is about projects and goals. And so that's one of the things that TEDI-London Summer School really pointed out, is that we can do whatever we set our minds on, and with whomever we want to do them, whether they are engineers or not.
Thanks, Sophia. And I just really love that all of you have really talked about the value of different perspectives, and again, connecting and coming together from whatever background. It sounds like you're all really kind of extolling that idea of inclusivity. It doesn't matter the background, the discipline, the training, the knowledge. You've come together, and together through lots of small actions, you've created really fabulous things that can go on to create great change. And so, yeah, thank you. And I'm just so pleased that that's the experience you've all had. So thank you so much to our wonderful panel. That was really fascinating, really interesting. Just before I open up to questions, I just wanted to ask Chris, for anyone listening or viewing, where will they be able to find the World Alzheimer Report?
Yes, certainly. So if you go to our website, which is alz.co.uk, you'll see a link from the homepage to our reports. You'll see the two most recent reports, World Alzheimer reports, on research on 2018 and last year's on stigma and attitude to dementia for 2019, which I would heartily recommend you dip into. And then that space will be where you'll find the World Report for 2020, and it'll go up on the 21st of September.
Fantastic, thank you. And any of our other panel members that have any reports or literature or anything you think would be interesting to people viewing this, please feel free to post links or information about those in the chat, and we can make those available to people. So thank you everyone for a fantastic discussion. It's been really, really interesting, and yet again another thing that's been part of the summer school that's changed my thinking and is going to give me lots to mull over this evening as I eat my dinner. But I'd now really love to open it up to the floor for questions. So Steve, if you'd like to let me know any questions.
Okay, so I've got a couple in there, and please write any more in if anyone have any. So first one, so from Miguel, congratulations for TEDI initiative. Can we see engineering as a social science?
Okay, interesting. So I'm not sure if anyone would like to take that, but I think I'll ask Sofia first as one of our engineering students. Can we see engineering as a social science?
I think definitely, because we can use whatever we've learned and build something with people. I don't know who in our panel said that, but it's definitely one of the lessons that I've learned in the summer school. And also, as Dennis had said before, it's all about not only asking the right questions, but asking the right people the right questions. And that definitely marks the point of being a social science.
Thank you. And Lynn, would you like to say anything on that topic of engineering as a social science?
I think if you see design as so central to engineering, how can we not think about it as a social science? I think if we think about designing anything and take the people out of it and take the social ecology out of it, then I think we're destined to fail. So absolutely, I think that's a transformative idea, and I would 100% support that reconceptualization. It is in fact a new one.
Thanks, Lynn. And I can see Kishan nodding fervently. Kishan, would you like to add anything? No, just agreeing, strongly agreeing.
Okay, cool. Graham was really re-emphasizing about the need to include people like Dennis in terms of when we're considering design and what's required for improved quality of life. And I think certainly going to Dennis's points of where things have supposedly been designed with dementia in mind, but clearly don't hit the mark. Craig, if you don't mind, I'm probably going to summarize yours a little bit more. So Craig mentioned about well-being or wellness is now a big consideration in building, certainly when we consider workspace density, space for gyms, rest space, etc. And there are some good examples of office buildings, and also the Melbourne Children's Hospital that are specific to creating an amazing environment. How can these examples be promoted or used by the panelist organisations to show what can be achieved through engineering?
So I'd love to start by asking Kavid to talk on that, given his work with the Mayor's Office and some of the challenges I know is particular to London and other urban environments. So Kavid, have you got any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, in terms of promoting and I guess building on these examples in other cities, I think that the challenge is, from my side of things, it's twofold really. One is, particularly in my environment, there's always going to be political challenges. I think, you know, even sort of at a local level in London, you know, we have 32 different boroughs, each of them with a council and councillors elected. And I think it's really, really difficult to, in any area actually, really have consistency, across it. And that's everything from services, in the specific case of people for dementia and health and social care, but also physical design, like planning and building regulations. I mean, very recently, without going into too much detail, there was there's a case in the press about a housing minister overturning local planning decisions in a London borough, and I think it's one of the big challenges is around that political environment and some of the different agendas, be they financial or otherwise, that kind of intersect. And I think we're only really in a position to change that, I think, through long-term kind of influencing and advocacy in the right areas. And I think that's part of the importance of organizations like my own, but particularly Alzheimer's Disease International, that kind of senior stakeholder governmental kind of influencing. I think that's through one way we can mitigate that challenge. And I think the other challenge really is often financial, and it's about having having an evidence base and the right kind of valuation from these buildings and from these kind of design districts or products that really show businesses, that show developers, that show designers that there is a positive impact, that they're willing to invest in things that are perhaps at this stage actually quite new and quite different. And I think new and different will always carry a degree of risk, but I think we can begin to mitigate that risk through really forming robust evaluation practices that can actually demonstrate that this has had a positive impact on people, but also have been financially viable to whatever that project is. And I think we're beginning to see more of that. I mean, there is some work. I think the University of Stirling has some stuff around building and environments, and we're beginning to see more of it in that space. And hopefully in a couple of years' time, we'll be in a different place. It was really encouraging yesterday, Sarah, to see representation from British Land and seeing the the desire that they have to do things different and to consider things differently. And I think once we begin to see some of the bigger organizations in that space really taking ownership of that and taking those risks and innovating, I think naturally we'll begin to see a better spread. But at the moment, I think we're just in a place where it's going to take a bit of influencing on a few levels.
Thank you. And I'd love to get Chris's views, given the global perspective and all the people you get to speak to, Chris. And I see your hands raised, so please go ahead.
Super. That was such an important point. And just a quick thought on the global perspective. 3 years ago, the World Health Organization launched the Global Action Plan on Dementia, and that was following 10 years of advocacy to get to that point. Now, you can imagine the focus of that is very much around the health and care elements of it, but it does extend into other areas. And one of the things that we're really trying to focus on through this design work and through the Convention of Rights of Persons with Disabilities is ultimately to try and get national dementia plans to factor in design. And at the moment, I'm not sure that any one of the ones that currently exist has a dedicated section on design. But if we can get that built in under the convention, it means that governments do have to start to report on progress against it as well. So it'll be one of the fundamental recommendations of the report that we put out later this year. Just a little sense of perspective, though. 194 member states of the UN and the WHO signed up to the Global Action Plan on Dementia 3 years ago. Perhaps the most important commitment to that is the development of a national dementia plan. There are currently 33 national dementia plans. The target is to hit 75% by 2025, so that'd be 146 plans. I have to say now that's impossible to reach. It is going to be one of those targets that's going to be well and truly missed. But our number one goal is to work with governments to make sure that those plans or strategies get developed. And from the publication of this report onwards, we are going to start to ask that question: will you start to factor in dementia design into your national plans?
Thank you. That's really interesting. It just made me think of, I was working on a project 8 years ago now, I think, and it was following, I think it was David Cameron's Big Society, and dementia was put sort of center stage of that, and then it just seemed to disappear from the agenda in many ways. And I think it's always the challenge, you know, with politics and agendas and targets. They are so fickle and tend to change as with the breeze, and it's really frustrating. I just wanted to come back actually to Graham's question and combine it really with Denziel's, and I'd like to ask Dennis and Lynn something. So Graham made the point that as engineers we need to understand the problem to find solutions, and we need more people like Dennis to help us design what's required for an improved quality of life. And then Denziel has said, do problems ever arise from co-design versus isolated design? So, and I'd really like to ask Dennis and Lynn, you know, who work together on some fantastic projects, how do we do more co-design or inclusive design, and what are the challenges and benefits of that? Go ahead, Dennis.
Go first, Dennis.
Okay. I think one of the big benefits is that, to start with, you then have market engagement, people that are going to promote and support whatever it is you're doing, and also then it's more likely to be easily adopted because it's got a familiarity. I was just involved in a study for almost a day, which is a 6-month project, and it was very clear that there was no real input from anyone with any real understanding of dementia in it, and I just couldn't work with that group, and told them politely to not darken the email again. But I've seen like some of the successes we've had, well, Lynn's had in Wollongong, narrating them to other people in other environments. The people can see that some things can be done a lot better, and there's a slow move to be a little bit more flexible, particularly when you can point out a couple of successes. Mm. But one thing that's becoming apparent is that it's the old problem of, you know, we're trying to do something with people with dementia, but we can't find anyone. There's only, you know, 50 million people to choose from. So hard to find.
Thanks, Ez. And I think it's it made me think of that, the difference between really meaningful and true co-design as an approach, as Kishan said earlier, where you actually are open to learning and changing as a result of that process. Everyone involved is open to learning and changing as a result of the process, rather than what I sometimes see as the more tick box approach of, you know, we can tick on the funding application, but it's not really approached in a meaningful way. And Lynn, any thoughts from you?
So I'll just pick up on a couple of things from Dennis. So I think in terms of the co-design process, the timing around that, and the idea of really kind of trying to take seriously that you're doing things from the beginning with people, that it's not just a consultation once you're kind of partway through a process, because I mean I'm constantly challenged by the fact that I'm usually too far ahead in my thinking before I've engaged with people in a meaningful way, and often my problem is how to come back from that, and how to really seriously start with the development of ideas from the ground up, rather than you know, you kind of writing the grant and already kind of having all this momentum in a particular direction. So when you talk about co-design versus isolated design, I think the timing of that is really important. In terms of the limitations of it, I think one of the things that I find most difficult is around the funding and making things a reality. So I find not being able to pay people the respect that they deserve for the participation that they bring and the intellectual property that they bring to the ideas and the processes, and the role of people living with dementia, you know, and being able to actually remunerate that or respect that or acknowledge it in a way that I feel is needed. I find that challenging. And I think in terms of co-design failure, I think the thing that I have seen in terms of limitations, because we've talked a lot about successes so far, is that quite often people with dementia will talk to us about the things that really do need to change in terms of our systems and our services and the way that things are organised. And we say, yeah, we agree with that, but it's too hard to do. So we back and we say, well, you've told us these things, but we're only able to achieve these other ones. And actually what we develop still fundamentally doesn't kind of, you know, really turn systems, I think, particularly upside down in the way that they need to be rearranged. So that would be one of my kind of frustrations with the limitations of the process, that we quite often don't know how to get the power or the capacity, the funding, the resources, the influence that we need to actually really be able to implement and design the amazing ideas that people have that will make a difference to their lives.
Thank you. And I think you raised such a good point about actually the way funding and universities and research grants are set up, that you have to already have the idea and it all mapped out before you can get any money, before you can often then actually engage anyone to take part in the project. And that's a really interesting point, and I think something that's worth looking at more in those processes and those systems. And I love that you talked about what I'm interpreting as disruption. Actually, how do we really, truly, meaningfully disrupt those very systemic issues or barriers or problems, and what's needed? And I love that, because TEDI-London's one of our values is how do we disrupt and transform. And I think also something I've often had back from people with dementia is that they're often invited in views, but very rarely do they then receive feedback, or are they involved in the feedback and the reporting and the evaluation. I think it's that really important idea of actually how do the systems need to be changed and the processes to ensure that it's truly a co-designed and delivered project from start to finish, right? You know, as you say, the ideas to the implementation, the process to then the evaluation and the feedback. So yeah, really thought-provoking. So we have come right up to the limit of the time we had today, and I think that's a testament to our fantastic panel members. Their just wonderful and thought-provoking insights and experiences and views and perspectives. It's just been absolutely fantastic. So I just want to say a huge thank you to all of you for not only your participation in our summer school, but also for your sitting on the panel today and just sharing such fantastic views with us, and a great conversation that's given me so much to think about. And I'd also really like to thank everyone who's attended today. And yes, I'll hand back to Steve. Thank you.
Cool. Thank you very much, everyone. It was really interesting, and thank you for all the great questions and the responses that came back from that. There's still so much to do, isn't there? But it's great to hear that so many ideas and great progression is being made, and pressure being put on different governments and different policy ways of thinking. I know we have a number of people from industry that have joined and asked some of the questions, so it's really great to see that involvement and it sitting more on the agenda. So thank you very much, everybody. Thank you for your time. Thank you for joining in. Enjoy the rest of your Thursday. Thank you very much.